1991, the long non-violent process known as the Singing Revolution culminates with the fall of the Soviet Union. The Baltic states finally achieves their independence from the newly established Russia. The Baltic states economically and conceptually turned away from Russia and towards Western Europe. This meant that Russia was not only left in a crisis after the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics fell, but also lost many of its territories. In 1999, with the start of Vladimir Putin's presidency, tensions over the historical record increased. The new regime began to consciously rehabilitate imperial-era leaders and symbols from the Russians' golden age, and began to deny occupations of the Baltic states. In 2000, Russian leaders start interpreting the Baltic occupation as either liberation from fascism or a voluntary act of joining the Soviet Union on part of the Baltics government, a point of view much in line with the Russian government's perspective on Baltic history and the role that the Soviet Union played in the region. For over a decade, Moscow has denied the Soviet occupation of the Baltic states. Only in the early years of Boris Yeltsin's presidency was there a historic accord in the Baltic-Russian relations. On July 29, 1991, Russia admitted the existence of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Protocol or Non-Aggression Protocol, where the Baltics were negotiated, but insisted that the three states join the Union voluntarily. In 2004, the Baltic states joins first the European Union, then the NATO, and finally the UN. By doing this, the Baltic gets closer to the West, which makes Russia feel threatened. But why? Because of the heart of NATO is Article 5 of Collective Defense, which states, and I quote, "The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently they agree that, if such an armed attack occurs, each of them in exercise of the right of individual or collective self-defense will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individual in concert with the other parties, such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed forces to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area." This treaty binds all NATO members together, committing them to protect each other and setting a spirit of solidarity within the alliance, putting them on even ground against Russia, or what we know as a balancing power between the East and West actors. In 2014, Ukraine's political weather was one of extreme instability. Approximately 59% of Crimea's population are ethnic Russians, and many felt discriminated by ethnic Ukrainians. This prompted Crimea to reach out to Russia for protection. After a referendum, which legitimacy was questioned by the West, Russia annexed Crimea. Why did this happen? Among the reasons exposed by Russia to justify the annexation of Crimea, the one that's particularly troublesome for the Baltic states is the defense of Russian minorities. It's common for ethnic Russians everywhere to feel like second-class citizens, to consume Russian media, and to agree with Putin's politics.
Combat near the Russian border. Ukrainian forces battle with separatist rebels loyal to Russia. More than a dozen killed in the fighting since Sunday. Each side blames the other for starting it, and NATO's leader says civilians are in danger.
The Baltic fears that this makes these populations more vulnerable to pro-Russian propaganda, that it may push them into forming pro-Russian guerrillas, and that Russia will take advantage of that. Additional to those actions, tension increased further after Russia captured an oil pipeline in Georgia and the military occupation of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, making clear that Putin's government is not afraid of taking military actions to protect his interests. In this image, we're able to see how many Russian neighboring countries have a percentage of ethnic Russians in their population. Like most countries sharing border with Russia, each Baltic country has a percentage of Russians in their population. Lithuania is 6%, Latvia is 27%, and Estonia is 25%. The Baltics worry that these minorities may be targeted by pro-Russian propaganda, to which they may be susceptible due to cultural closeness to Russia and an inability or unwillingness to consume anything that isn't Russian. These concerns are not misfounded. Problems with citizenship, feelings of alienation, and pro-Putin positions are prevalent among Russian minorities. The West says that Putin could use that to introduce pro-Russian terrorism to the region. But why would Russia be interested in taking advantage of these minorities? If you look at them in a map, you notice that the biggest concentration of Russian minorities can be found along the Russian borders. These regions, with majority of ethnic Russians, form a corridor that would connect Russia to the Baltic and Atlantic seas. Their relevance is geopolitical. Gaining direct access to the Baltic Sea and even a part of the Atlantic Sea that's not frozen would stimulate Russia's trade greatly, which it needs to modernize its military and assert its naval power. Since a strong Russia is seen as nothing but threatening to the West, the Baltics are key actors stuck in the middle of a power clash. On one side, the NATO, with whom they side, on the other, Russia. This isn't problematic only for the Baltics. Even if NATO sees the Baltics as a buffer zone, losing them to Russia means having Russia way closer to the West. They need them to keep Russia in line. But why are the Baltics afraid of Russia? The Baltics alone are small and weak. They don't have the power to defend themselves. And although they have increased their military expenditure since 2005 and are expected to continue doing so, it's still not enough. The difference in military power can be seen by comparing the Baltic troops, which correspond to the color dark blue, against the Russians, who are red. They are clearly outnumbered by 4-1. But who's really behind NATO's power? The biggest contributor to the NATO is the US. Proportionally, the 3.5% of its GDP is invested in military expenditure, making it one of the only 2 members that comply with the pledge of investing 2% of its annual GDP, making it also the biggest contributor, enough to be responsible for 75% of NATO's military expenditure. When we consider that the NATO was created to deter Russia's power and act as a balancing actor in the international community, the weight that the US support has towards the alliance becomes evident. This is why Trump's recent declarations regarding withdrawing from the NATO are so troublesome, because they would leave the NATO and the Baltics without the economic and military support. Without the USA's power backing it, the balance of power tilts towards Russia. So it's no wonder then that Trump's declaration of appraisal of Putin have been subject of criticism.
Donald Trump has called it obsolete, says it has problems.
NATO is obsolete.
He thinks NATO's original purpose of protecting against the Soviet Union makes it irrelevant, that it's ill-equipped to tackle terrorism, and that other members don't pay their share towards it. NATO is still extremely active, with some 4,000 US troops in Poland and the Baltic states, and tens of thousands on 48-hour standby, bolstering NATO's allies and sending a clear message to Russia.
Recently, there's been concern surrounding the Baltics and a hybrid warfare, which means the blend of hard and soft power, a combination of military and non-military instruments such as trade and energy embargoes, attack to democracy, propaganda, shows of power, the spreading of disinformation and fake news. All in all, it seems that this is a more realistic possibility to a full-blown war, and some may even say that it's been happening for some years now. So, how vulnerable are the Baltic states to hybrid warfare? From these two most vulnerable, Estonia seems to have the least to worry about. Although ethnic Russians make up to 25% of its population, their standard of living is way above that of Russian living in Russia. They've been making conscious effort to make them feel integrated to the country, and their ability at handling fake news and disinformation has set a standard worldwide. Then we have Latvia, often cited as the most discriminatory of the Baltic countries. Not only do they have complex relationships with the Russian minorities, their percentage of ethnic Russian also raises up to 27%, many of whom are non-citizens. And last, we have Lithuania, which has little to worry about. The Russian minorities only amounts to 6% of their population, and they are granted citizenship at the moment of their independence. This means that no Lithuanian ethnic Russian support the title of non-citizen, which means that they have full rights within the country. Tensions will continue to increase between the parties. Deterrence of power and military display would be of daily activity in the Baltics. Some people even consider this to be the Second Cold War. In this scenario, uncertainty is inevitable, especially with a president so unpredictable as Donald Trump and Putin. For now, it's just a matter of sitting down and waiting. As the situation continues to escalate, every decision made, even the most insignificant one, is determinant on the future of international community and even the world.